Hello and welcome to this episode of Focus On with me, Gamkhatsi Mosepele. The Automotive Industry Development Centre earlier this year celebrated 20 years of its establishment, marking a 2-decade milestone in its operations. Earlier today, a number of stakeholders from the private and public sector mapped out a lay of the land on what still needs to be done to address challenges in the sector. Joining me for more is the AIDC CEO, Andile Africa, as well as the Gauteng Economic Development MEC, Tasneem Mutara, on what still needs to be done to improve South Africa's automotive sector. Mr. Africa, thank you so much for joining us. I'd just like to begin with the current state of the automotive sector within South Africa, particularly in terms of the production and market share. Where does it stand?
So the South African automotive industry has a long history. We have 7 OEMs in South Africa. 3 of those are based here in Gauteng, and 3 of them are in the Eastern Cape, and 1 in KZN. The production volumes, majority of the production volume that we produce in South Africa is actually for export markets. In Gauteng, for example, we have Ford Motor Company that exports over 80% of their production. So the status of the automotive industry in South Africa is in a good state. We are one of the big contributors to the GDP of the country. We also have created some good jobs. However, there are some challenges, and these challenges include issues of transformation. This is one of the most untransformed sectors in the country. Local content is one of the challenges. We have a very ambitious plan through the Automotive Master Plan 2035, where we're targeting to have 60% of the local content being produced in South Africa. Currently, we're sitting at around 40% of the local content being produced of components being produced in South Africa.
I'm also eager or interested within the evolution of particularly the AIDC. I understand recently you celebrated over 2 decades being established. As you've mentioned some of the challenges, what has been the growth from the beginning stages to now?
Yeah, the past 20 years have been very challenging interesting for us. We've been able to attract foreign direct investment. We have a supplier park in Roslyn, which is close to 2 of the OEMs, BMW and Nissan. And we've got components manufacturers there that produce and supply components in sequence and just in time to these OEMs. We also supply the other OEMs out of the park in the other provinces. But over the 20 years, we've seen that journey, the achievements are we've been able to create employment, we've been able to create investment infrastructure and attract foreign direct investment. But as I've said, part of what we're doing is to contribute towards transformation, is that we're running incubation hubs at the AIDC. We're looking to introduce black entrepreneurs into the supply chain of the automotive industry. So that's our portion, at least our contribution towards transforming the industry.
And I'm also interested in terms of logistics and infrastructure. Are there any challenges that you particularly face within where the AIDC is located?
Well, I would like to explain it in the context of Gauteng as a province. Gauteng as a province has an ideal positioning or situation in that we are basically a gateway to Africa, to Southern Africa, but we also are not far from, for example, the Durban port. However, the logistics challenge that we've had, particularly at the ports, has been the issue of congestion. So part of what we're looking at is to move transformation of cars from road to rail, and that's one of the topics that we're dealing with today. Is the issue of moving cargo from road to rail, and then secondly is looking at using the Kucha port as opposed to the Durban port as an alternative to export of vehicles out of Gauteng. As I've said, there's 3 OEMs here. The 2 OEMs that are exporting in big volumes is BMW with the X3 and Ford with the Ford Ranger. So these OEMs require more logistics capacity, particularly on rail. As we all know, there's been big challenges with the rail infrastructure, the deterioration thereof. And so part of our engagement with Transnet and other stakeholders is to actually revive and revitalize the rail infrastructure.
And in terms of export volumes, how much or what is the proportion of South Africa's automotive production that is being exported?
Yeah, as I said, it varies from one OEM to the next, but probably over 60% of our production is, if you aggregate it across all the other OEMs. However, some OEMs go up to 80% of their production being export, and the balance being for local market. So this, by no doubt, the largest proportion of our production capacity is geared up towards export into the European Union and other markets in Europe.
And lastly, you've mentioned the impact and how your corporation essentially is creating jobs within the South African context, something that is a pressing need. Just speaking on also the skills base, what does that picture look like in terms of bringing in the necessary skills and level of education to ensure that you carry out those jobs and also grow the sector to lead to an addition of more jobs and bolstering the economy in that space?
Yeah, the ADC has an institution called the Gauteng Automotive Learning Centre. This is a specialized center where we have young people going in there and learning very specialized skills that have to do with either vehicle assembly, welding, spray painting, and those type of skills that are important in terms of the value chain. We are looking now to introduce new modules of training that are geared up towards electric vehicles, as we recognize the fact that the world is now moving towards electric vehicles. So we will be designing modules to train our young people to be able to firstly assemble, but also to maintain and fix electric vehicles in the aftermarket.
MEC, thank you so much for joining us. A map of the day was painting a picture into the automotive industry. I'd just like for you to expand on what has the industry or what has evolving in the industry looked like, but also mention of some of those challenges in terms of transformation and rectifying historical imbalances. Where would you say the sector is today?
Thank you so much. Yes, so really we were taking stock of provincial government's involvement in the automotive sector over the past 20 years and what we've really been able to do. So of course, yes, we've been able to establish institutions. We've also been able to establish the Tshwane Special Economic Zone, which is really an automotive hub, focusing on supporting but also housing original equipment manufacturers. Of course, the transformation in the sector is extremely slow by South African standards. I think importantly, not only on against race or perspective of race, but also a gender perspective. And I think those are two areas that we are really very vocal on policy-wise. That's what we want to look at, is transformation that transforms not only from a race perspective, but also from a gender perspective. So there it's a continued struggle, and it's something that we're going to be very, very forceful on going forward, simply because we do also directly support the automotive sector here in the province. Some of their biggest challenges, of course, are those that require government to respond to. And whether we do it directly ourselves as government or we work together with the private sector, they relate to logistics. And I think today we had in the room, EXA was also represented, really showcasing what their capability is, how they can play a role in responding to some of the logistic challenges that the automotive sector has, especially as it relates to moving parts. So not the whole vehicle, of course, but parts, because parts are as important to be able to manufacture, not just relying on road and maritime freight. So the biggest challenges we know, yes, is maybe the condition of the road infrastructure is deteriorating, but we are responding to that directly as a province, together working with national government. But the rail, and we can't shy away from that. And just the fact that the ports that move the biggest amount of of finished products is the Richards Bay, the Durban port. The congestion, the fact that the capacity is not meeting the demand. So we're working, and I think we've got very good responses, especially from entities such as Transnet, working on the rail corridor, looking at alternatives, not only moving product out of KZN, but also product out of Eastern Cape. We are fully behind that and supporting that initiative. So government has to do what government is supposed to do. Infrastructure, especially public infrastructure, that is required for economic purposes is the responsibility of government. And as I said, whether we do it directly ourselves on the back of our own strength or we work together with the private sector, that is something that has to be done.
And there was mention of tapping into air freight and almost a description towards it being a possible solve to some of the logistical issues that Gauteng particularly faces, or the South African automotive industry. Can you just give us insight into some of the key trends or what essentially is working within that space? Would you also then agree that possibly the future of automotive sector in South Africa will be largely focused on air freight and some of the key initiatives that were mentioned earlier?
Most certainly. So I think the biggest message coming out from that component of the conversation was the fact that there is capacity. They have been very resilient. In post-COVID, they're one of the sectors or components of the sectors that have resuscitated very, very fast and even gone above and beyond what their pre-COVID numbers were. Of course, given the fact that COVID forced us to, move goods via air, as opposed to the traditional routes of the logistics value chain. How they're going to support the automotive sector is definitely, like I said, capacity, and they've demonstrated the kind of capacity that they have to be able to move parts. And also just being able to show and demonstrate that industry or that sector of the logistics value chain can move people and goods at the same time, given that, aircraft are bigger, et cetera. It is efficient, it is more reliable, and I think in any business, reliability is a key driver of your investment decision, whether you can expand your investment, etc. So air freight definitely gives us that opportunity, and I think they've got to appreciate the kind of capacity that we offer, which is essential. It's very, very huge, but also the fact that we can move goods where you wouldn't have traditional infrastructure like road and rail available, especially onto the African continent. But you do have functional airports to accept logistics, to accept cargo. That is a very, very viable, a better option, of course.
And lastly, I'd just like to touch on intra-African travel, but also embracing trade amongst Africa and keeping those investment flows and capital within the continent. What is the approach from your organization or from government within this space to ensure that there's collaboration and easier flow of goods and people, as you've mentioned, between the respective countries?
Most definitely. There definitely is. One, we've seen an increase in interest of different, or let me say, alternative destinations on the African continent, wanting to fly direct between ourselves and those countries. Algeria, as an example, North African country, not necessarily a traditional, what we would have understood to be a traditional base for us to receive both consumers, tourists, business, etc. We're driving the Africa Free Trade Area Agreement implementation, and how do we really support businesses that want to manufacture for export, but want to manufacture for export into Africa. And I think it is growing. There is a lot of interest. There is a lot of increased trade between ourselves and African countries. And we're looking at that data just to look at where are the interests, where are the demand. Because if we are able to meet that demand, we can also ready ourselves to be in a prime position to take full advantage of that. But like I say, we're seeing a lot of interest from what would ordinarily be considered non-traditional trading partners, both from a consumer but also from a tourism perspective. A lot from North Africa, and of course even from Western and Eastern Africa, which have also been traditionally our trading partners, but also business, business interests and businesses who want to invest in South Africa, but are also interested to have South African companies invest in their destinations as well.
Thank you so much for your time. And as you've mentioned, Gauteng's positioned as the economic hub, not only for South Africa, but Africa. We certainly hope to build on that interest and let the success echo through to other parts of the country. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And that's how we wrap up this conversation of Focus on the future of South Africa's automotive industry. From myself and the team, it's goodbye for now.